Hello, welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Health and Wellness. And today, my guest is Kim Faith. She's a futurist, an inspirational leadership author, a keynote speaker. She's written a book, Your Lion Inside: Discover the Power Within and Live Your Fullest Life. And today, she's going to be talking to us about the 7 sisters, the 7 mindsets that impact every area of our life. I'm so excited to get into this today, Kim. Thank you so much for being on the show.
I am thrilled to be here, Gina. Thank you for what you do to help elevate us all as we continue on our life journey.
You know, right now is one of those times in history where we need all the tools in our tool belt. It's the perfect
Yes.
time to add a tool like this to our tool belt as we're pivoting in our world as well as in our country, and the workplace is changing. A lot of things are changing. So I would love to just jump right in and have you talk about those 7 mindsets.
Absolutely. I'll be glad to, and I'll share a lot more even with that. Okay, so I am thrilled to have the chance to be able to share some of the insights around the book. And what part of what even inspired me was that someone actually asked me this question that you see on the slide there: is the glass ceiling also a mirror? And it started me on a journey. So I want to show you an image on the next slide. And when you see the image, I want you just to answer to yourself, what do I see? Okay, are you ready?
Yes,
1,
ma'am.
2, 3. What do you see?
I see a beautiful, colorful bird.
Absolutely. I've shown this image to thousands of leaders all over the world, and everyone always says, I see a parrot, a colorful parrot. Well, when you dive in a little bit deeper, what it really is a woman painted like a parrot. And this was the winner of the body painting championship from an Italian artist. This was from the year 2012. So why do I bring this up? Well, the very things that make our brains really helpful by quickly coming to assumptions, looks like a parrot, shaped like a parrot, colored like a parrot, are the very things that sometimes can stand in our way. And what I've come to learn is that rarely are things what they appear to be at first glance. And so I want to take us a bit on a journey here today, Gina. So I want to show everybody right quick. There's a lot of value in being able to see the big picture. So this is my wedding picture from 5 years ago. And that's important to see. But when you zoom into it, I want to show you my daughter. Okay, she's now 23 and starting her first job. But I also want to bring your awareness to my mother-in-law. That is my 104-year-old Italian mother-in-law. We just lost her in April of 2020. Now, there's a great value to seeing the bigger picture, but if we were to zoom in on just her, then I would tell you more about Rose. And this was her family in the year of 1929. And there is Rose all the way there on the left-hand screen. And so in order to understand Rose, it's important not only to see where she is today, but it's also to see where she was programmed, where she was influenced early in her career. And so people ask me quite frequently, she lived with us actually for 2 years, from when she was 99 and 100. And I had a chance to experience what it was like to live with someone who was 100 years old. And that's when I learned that it was how the past intersects with the present. And so people ask me all the time, Kim, what was it like to live with a 100-year-old woman, a centenarian? Well, here's one photo that will tell the whole story. What happens is that's exactly what it was like. I was married to her only son, St. Peter, and for the entire time that we all lived together, that is really what the whole situation was like. But I bring this up because we are finding ourselves in this place right now where we see where we are today, but I want to take us back to when we were a child. So here's me, at an awkward, I think it must have been about 9 or 10. There I am with my big, thick glasses. What you could not see were my 2 hearing aids taped to my head. So literally, my mother would very lovingly cut up 2-sided tape to put on the back of the hearing aids so that I could run and walk and not have my glasses or my hearing aids all fall off. I was really quite an awkward child. But what happens is the messages that we receive, even back then. So I want you to think back. This picture would make me cringe for years. I didn't like it. Other people are like, oh, that's so cute. But I remember feeling very awkward, very out of place, and nothing ever seemed to go along. So I'm bringing this up because I want us to be able to take a look at the big picture. I love this illustration about I'm so glad the hole isn't on our end of the boat. We sometimes forget that there's a much bigger story out there, and a lot of us as women have been bailing out at the bottom when there's a bigger story at play here. So I want to talk about this concept of mental models, all right? So mental models are the lens through which we see the world. They're not good or bad, they simply are. What's dangerous about them, though, Gina, that's so important for all of us to remember, is that we don't even realize that we have them on. And in many cases, I could actually put on 10, 12, 15, 20 different glasses because we have all these lenses. So I call them mental models, all right? That's the world that I was raised in. And so let me just quickly let your folks know about what are mental models. So way back in the 1400s, the mental model about the shape of the world was what? It was flat. And then along comes Christopher Columbus, supposedly, and all of a sudden we find out that the shape of the world is round. Well, what changed? Did the entire shape of the world change? No. What changed was our belief in what the shape of the world was. And then for some of you, you might recognize this particular picture. That was actually Roger Bannister. In 1951, he was the first human being to ever run the 4-minute mile. Well, did you know that the next year, half a dozen other people all of a sudden ran a 4-minute mile? So it begs the question that did everyone all of a sudden simply get faster? And the answer is no. What happened is our belief about the way we could run is what changed. So as I went on this journey, please understand that I was working with women all over the world. Here I am with a lovely group of women that I was with in Singapore. And I've had lots of conversations. And so what I bring up in this book that I'll share with you in just a moment is that these were universal. I began to find that there were universal belief systems that were in our way no matter where we are in the world. And as I was listening to conversations with women, whether they were early career, advanced career, or whether they were even someone that stayed at home, I began to listen to what was not being said. That's very telling. You see, being a hearing impaired, I had to actually learn how to listen to almost an offbeat of what was happening in life. It sounded like it could be, it might be. I was always listening to more than what someone actually said because I could not actually always catch what they said. And I learned that there was usually a big disconnect between what we might say and what the meaning really was. And that's what I found out with women. So I started collecting brand words as I was working with corporate women. And I want to just show you some of them right here. And I started asking them, could you please describe what you want your leadership brand to be? And so they would give me some words and I would hear good words: resilient, energetic, authentic, it's collaborative, inclusive, team builder. But I began to see, conscientious, love those. I began to see a pattern of words that were almost like an undercurrent, Gina. I began to see the words helpful, that we described ourselves as that, hardworking, when in fact we were so much more. Dedicated and loyal, I saw those words together a lot. Not that they're bad words, but we're more than that. Every time I saw those two words, I couldn't help but think of a golden retriever that was by my side all the time. And I see honest, that was fine. And I started to see words that were not adequately describing the incredible women that were in front of me, Gina. And all of a sudden, after collecting this data and seeing this over and over, I remember talking to a group and I showed this picture for the first time and I said, why? Why are we acting small like a cat when we have the strength of a lion inside? And I will tell you, there was an audible gasp in the room when I showed this picture. It was almost like everyone was looking around. I'll never forget the moment. I know exactly where I was and what room I was at. And in that moment, I realized that we had this universal story that was playing out for all of us. And so I'll go through a number of the different stories here. But what I did is I wrote this book based on the 7 universal mindsets that were going through, that I've discovered. And there were many of them. This is one of the stories. And I named them after, I started to call them sisters, the Sisterhood of 7. Why did I do that? And that's actually even an old picture. That was my first edition. Why did I do that? Well, so let me just stop here for a minute because I want to just kind of tune into folks. Why did I share the fact that these were sisters? Because what I found out is that we had one foot in the past and one foot in the future. And that, so living with my 100-year-old mother-in-law showed me how much we were carrying from the past. I don't know if I would have really put all this together if I was not living with her. Because I would come home from a conversation with a corporate executive woman who was actually moving up, and we would look at her and say, oh, she must have all the answers, you know, and she is battling with the same thing. She's having a hard time. And so the 7 sisters, I started to call them sisters because I became convinced that if we could have solved this already, we would have already done so. So let's just be honest about that. If we could have already kind of let go of some of these belief systems that were that we've been carrying, we would have already done so. So why had we not? We've come 100 years. I mean, I kid you not, I had maps on the wall. I had timelines on the wall. I was mapping all of this out like a mad scientist. And I began to figure out that there were these 7 belief systems and that they were like family to us. That it wasn't going to be helpful for us just to say, don't do that anymore. They were like sisters. You know, sometimes there's a good side of a sister and sometimes there's the not so good side of a sister. And so I started to map them out, and I came up with this little kind of trifold. I call it an inspiration guide. Your listeners can download this at Your Lion Inside. And I tested this out and I showed them, I said, the red zone, I made it like a traffic light. Is that the red zone was where we wanted to stop and be aware. The yellow zone is where we slowly began to move into our power. And the green zone is where we wanted to go. And when I first showed this, I asked them not to open it up. I just want them to look at the red zone where I listed out the 7 sisters. And the 7 beliefs were, I expect perfection. I have to meet all demands. I need permission, approval. I should accept what is said or done. By the way, that's the root of the Me Too movement. I'm not qualified enough. If I will work hard enough, I will be rewarded, and I'm okay in the background. Some of these were conscious, but I'll be honest with you, I found out that many of them weren't. Many of them were unconscious. So let me just kind of go back and feel free to comment if you have a thought here. What I want to show you is that so often I figured out that there was a really important question for us to ask as women. And that was, is it the system or is it me? Somehow, and this is so eye-opening, somehow all of us were carrying baggage from what society had taught us, what religion had taught us, what our spouses had taught us, what our families had taught us, all of this stuff. Maybe it was the way, you know, we're supposed to be in politics. Maybe it's the way we're supposed to be in leaders, but it was something larger than us. And yet we were carrying it, Gina, like it was our own. So let me kind of show you how it happens. I do this mapping process with a lot of my leaders where we actually map out the system that they're in. So let's just take a healthcare system, a political system, a business system, and they would write down the tangible parts of their system and the intangible parts. And I would have them start to connect what affects what. And I wanted them to see this because we can actually map out, we have a system even in our own lives, okay? So even our own personal lives, I could do the very same thing if you and I were here together. What happens is that we don't realize that these arrows, all the things that connect it, it actually begins to roar into life of a system of its own. And so I began to notice that there was this system that was tap dancing in all of our subconscious. Now, please understand, I spent 2 years trying to disprove me. I really did. I saw it and I almost became startled by it. And I was like, no, we've come farther than that. There is no way. And so what I found out is that we each are carrying this thing that I've called the narrative. It's the storyline that we were all told once upon a time. This is the way it is. And we've actually been trying to fill that all this time. And it was so subconscious, Gina, that people didn't even realize, women didn't even realize that this was tap dancing in their head. We see this narrative in the news all the time. It reinforces this belief of how we're supposed to look and act and speak. Just think of the last time that you've heard that so-and-so was a little too harsh, or their voice was a little too shrill. We see it in the magazines, all of these things that we're supposed to do. And when I became alert to the narrative, I mean, so I was actually in some sessions where I was in 3 different cities in a matter of the same week, 3 different cities, 3 different industries. And I was asked the exact same question verbatim. And I was like, where did that question come from? And what I figured out is that it was coming from the news. that we actually were inadvertently, subconsciously taking in all of these different things with the news. And because all of us, Gina, as women, were doing this, we were what I call in the fishbowl with a narrative. We were so close to the story, to what it was, that the people beside us and to the right of us and to the left of us were seeing the same thing. And when I finally figured it out, I started to pluck women out of the fishbowl. And that's what my life purpose became. Because I remember being in there when I thought life was a certain way, and it really was something very different. And so what we've been fooled into believing is that we begin to look for a hero. Maybe it's the white knight riding in on the white horse, somebody else to save us. Or maybe we want to be the hero, okay? We think that we have to save everyone. Or we find ourselves slowly inching into this place of who's to blame. And oddly enough, victimhood begins to take root there. And it's not that we ever call it that, but what it is that we begin to feel a little bit more powerless, step by step by step. And so I bring all of this up is because cause and effect is far removed in space and time. My world is where I was teaching all of this with systems thinking, is that we forget that the dominoes that we're living right now in our life were pushed a long time ago. And the same thing happens with women, is what we're dealing with right now, Gina, and that's part of what I was working so hard to bring awareness to, is that it's a generational issue. Let me show you this quickly on a timeline. So my mother-in-law was born in 1916, before women had the right to vote. So let's put that in context. Okay, women's right to vote did not happen until 1920. In fact, this August 26th, we'll be celebrating the 100th anniversary of women's right to vote. I'm a little concerned that milestone may get lost because of all that's going on, so I don't want to bring that up here. Well, then we realized that we had the 2016 election, and that was a major threshold that we passed over. We saw 2017, the Me Too movement hit. And here we are, in 2018, 2020, and then 2020, we're here at the 2020 anniversary. Now, I want to put this in context, because when you look at the list below, I'm going to circle right there. The United States was one of the earlier countries to have women's right to vote. We actually were in 1920. Take a look at all the other countries that were after us. And what became very evident to me is when I began to look at what is life going to be like in 100 years from now, that here we are straddling what was happening between the past and the future. And if we were not, I wanted at that moment, I was so inspired to make sure that we created a very different life for the women ahead of us, for our daughters. And so that's when I began to work through this thing that I was showing you. We have the red zone, which every time I bring this up to women, they resonate. Women usually resonate with at least two or more. Sometimes we've already danced with certain sisters a certain way. And like I said, I wanted to do it like a traffic light analogy so that we would have less resistance. I wanted the book to be important, but for me, if I could not explain it all on one page, then it was too complicated. And I wanted this to be something that women could even carry in their pocket, in their purse. Because the red zone, I found out, is that whenever powerlessness was tap dancing on our shoulder, it could usually be tracked back to one of these sisters. And then I told you there's the yellow zone, where I actually began to rewrite what some of the phrases were and some of the mental models. And then the green zone was where we want to go. And so take a look at all of these. Now I'm going to show you some examples of where these sisters show up, because oddly enough, we don't even realize it. It's that deep into our collective psyche, our collective subconscious. And what I found is that it mirrored with whatever we thought individually was also what was out there collectively. So I took just a few examples about how these belief systems show up. So let's talk about Me Too. Me Too is rooted in two beliefs with these sisters. Darsha, I should accept what is said or done. Please understand that a lot of these are subconscious, but we have this belief that we should just accept it. I have story after story, and Gina, I'm sure you've lived this yourself, where we begin to accept things that we knew deep down were not the right things, but we weren't sure how to find our way out of it. And then when we add that to the sister of Renee, if I have to meet all the demands, well, you put those two things together and it's a recipe for disaster. Now, for anybody listening, please understand, I'm not saying that the system is not at fault and that the others don't have a responsibility. They do. What I found with this, and what I found with my own personal story, is that the power lies in figuring out what piece of the equation is ours. what was mine. And when I shifted that, and that's what I started doing for so many women, when we shifted what was our piece of the puzzle, that's where we began to step into a more powerful place. Now, I want to go back to what happened with the Nassar gymnastics situation. Two very important belief systems, because people ask themselves, how did this happen? How did this gentleman, how did this monster get by with this abuse all this time? Take a look at that headline. I'm a mom who was in the exam room while the doctor treated my daughter. And so this goes back to Darsha of how many of us should accept what is said and done, because when we go back and we look at it, this is a difficult issue. And so I know I want you to just breathe through it as we listen through this, because this is really hard to see sometimes. But when you go back and we talk, think through all the times that our gut told us something was wrong, and yet we didn't push it. And so when we have Darsha and then Gabriella, the fact that I need permission or approval, we would give our authority to these places like the doctor, like the boss, like the leader, like the husband. And there we are. We become part of the party that allows this to happen. And so even if we were to go down to the women as CEOs, I can't tell you how many times I get into this conversation with people. I'm not qualified enough. And whether that bubbles up us actually saying it or whether it's accidental, it stops us from making all kinds of decisions. Jalila, very big deal. I can't tell you how many women I've met that they think if they just put their head down and work hard enough, they'll be rewarded. When in fact, the way to shift that is to begin to say, okay, I can advocate and care for myself. And Nikki was an interesting one, because Nikki was one, when you hear women say, oh, well, I don't have to talk about myself. I want to just talk about the team. I don't want to brag. It's okay. Other people can get credit. The intention of it was good, but what was happening for us over time is we actually have been trained to stay invisible, to be behind the scenes. And I mean, story after story, you can see my passion come here. This has been my passion project here. And so I want to go back to one of the other sisters. There's no perfect way about why they're putting it together in the order. You can download it. I was just putting together some of the thoughts here. But how many of us have been paralyzed by this issue of perfection? And Carrie, what I found is, and this is what I want to pull off, and I want to talk to your listeners eye to eye here. Carrie was probably, I began it with Carrie, and then I went through the whole circle, because I believe it begins and ends with Carrie. I believe it begins and ends with Carrie, because this expectation of perfection, it shows up in the smallest of ways. It shows up in all the photo editing apps that we have. It shows up in all the energy that we invest in trying to be perfect. This expectation of perfection is actually rooted in the concept of worthiness, Gina. And when I began to find that so many women were trying to do that, and I've lived there, okay, I've lived there. And when you go through this expectation of perfection, I mean, I'm a recovered bulimic. It took me 20 years to try to come over that. I live this stuff. I've been there. I understand what the struggles are like before, during, and after. It was a big win for me to move into that yellow zone where you can say, I believe done is better than perfect. But the even bigger win and vista of freedom that's waiting for us all is in 3 small words. I am enough. And when I would have those tender moments with women having this conversation, understanding you don't have to strive anymore. Who you are, simply being in the room, is enough. You don't have to do, you don't have to prove, you don't have to, you don't have to, it's not all the action and the busyness. Do you understand that you simply breathing is enough? I didn't realize what a tender spot that was until I would have women repeat after me to say the words, I am enough. And the tears would start to fall. And that's when I realized there's this pervasive undercurrent of the issue around worthiness. And I want you to know I will spend the rest of my life fighting that battle for all of us. So this issue of Carrie. So let me just show you a few other issues. I'm convinced the whole issue around breast cancer also has a story that's hidden for us that we haven't quite wrestled with yet. We all know that there's been a rising rate of breast cancer. But what I want to point out is that it's been going up. And I think it's more. I've begun to think it's really more. Now we'll see whether the stats and how this shows up, but when you go back and look that it's been rising since the 1970s, and you take a look at where it was going up, I have to wonder what correlation is there to be able to take a look at the breast cancer rate and our trying to do all, be all, manage all. Are we actually part of that movement to be able to make ourselves sick? I bring this up not to make it a difficult point, but for us to begin to have some real questions and to ask ourselves, what are you discovering? What are you discovering that there are these patterns out there that are happening that we haven't invested a whole lot of time in? And so I have a document that people can download that shows you about this cause and effect as far removed in space and time. I won't go over the whole document here, but I do want to mention to you what it is a timeline, and it looks a little bit like this. You can go to epicenterofchange.com and actually download it for yourself. And you'll see where I put 200 years on one page so that we could see it all right there on one page. Because I was curious, I was almost obsessed, with this issue of why were we feeling this way? And here's what I discovered, is that we spent a long time being focused outside of ourselves on the external change. And those were things that needed to happen. All the different voting rights, all the different emphasis, the things that even happened in the 1960s and the 70s. But our focus all this time has been external. I don't think we've had those honest conversations about the fact that does there still take collective change? Hands down, absolutely. But I think it's time for us to really begin to slow down enough and say what needs to change internally. I've had these conversations with thousands of women, and even ones that you and I would perceive, doctors, physicians, even ones that you and I would perceive had it all together, the same tape plays. I finally realized that we could not have enough degrees, enough certifications, enough other validations to erase this internal issue. And for even myself, I learned that when the way I thought inside changed, everything else changed. And what's interesting about this is that all these other things that we've been listening to, it's mental models that's been decided by other people, Gina. So there's a terrific book. I love this book. Notice what it talks about. It says how science got women wrong and the need to rewrite that story. Because some of the studies that we have all been heard our whole life and validating, it was from a mental model that is outdated. And let me show you. So when I was doing all of this research, I was really deep in history. And I remember the moment that it hit me that what history really was. That what it really was his story. That everything we had been taught had been through the lens of his story. Not that it's a wrong way, but it's only one way. It is like taking a lens, okay, of society and ripping it in half. And we walk through society with this one lens, his story. And every study, everything that we've been taught has all been through a half lens. This is not a whole lens. And you and I have both worked with men, loved guys. Guys are not the enemy, but they get very single focused where all they see is that one domino in front of them. They don't see all of the other host of unintended consequences that can happen. And we actually have trained ourselves. Take a look. There's a man and a woman there, and a woman knows she is holding the dominoes behind her because she sees farther ahead. She sees farther ahead. We know this. This is part of our gift. We actually can see that there's going to be a lot of dominoes falling. And we spend a lifetime trying to share with the rest of them about, hey, hello, if I can help you avoid this, if we take a look at it. Does that resonate?
Yes, absolutely.
And so I believe that we're entering a time where we're being asked to take a look at her story. And here's what's interesting about her story is that, Gina, it always evolves to our story. Always. It's the way we're wired. I would say 98% of the time it evolves to our story. And so there was something really interesting, even with the Rent the Runway, is that there was a story way back about 2 years ago, and I have this even in the book. Yeah, I know you probably read it if you want to comment, is about she actually said, wait a minute, why are we treating everybody like a two-class tier system? I realize that I can be part of the solution. What did you think when you read that part of it, Gina?
You know, it's really interesting because I thought to myself, here's a woman who is taking her influence, her power, if you will, and she's leveling the playing field for whoever wants to be on her team. And I thought that was a really powerful move, that she's recognizing that we all have equal value. But the world doesn't work that way. But to create I'm a microcosm of such level value and really
Yes.
honoring, especially when she said, my pregnancy and birth is no more important than your pregnancy and birth, to her
Yes.
employee who was a seamstress, was really powerful.
Well, and I actually was in an airport when this story broke, and I had been wrestling with this her story, our story thing. And at that moment, she crystallized that was exactly what it was. Because she said, I modeled after all the past best practices, which, by the way, every best practice that we model was told through one lens. So we're living this life where we've only been half lens here, which means I believe that we are in need of a reinvention in every aspect of society. And to be honest with you, we're dealing with that right now with everything that's going on with COVID and even the pandemic. So I bring all of this up because what happens is the minute we start talking about some of these things, people want to kind of say, oh, well, you're a feminist. And to me, anytime someone puts any label on me, it's like they're trying to put me in a box. And I don't go in that box anymore. I consider myself a love warrior for humanity. If any other people's need to put me in a box, that's their issue. Some women like the words feminism, some don't. What's important for us all to remember is that we're at the time now for us to make our own rules and define that. And that's a choice that'll happen day by day and decision by decision. So how do we know when we're operating under someone else's rules or someone else's narrative? Here's a good hint. I'm absolutely convinced that anytime that word should comes up, it's our F-bomb. And if we all could almost, with some humor, tongue in cheek, the minute we hear a friend or a colleague say, oh, well, I should do this, I want us to go, oh, I can't believe you said that. Because buried underneath should are layers of other people's expectations. Other people's expectations. I buried that a long time ago. I've got a little gravestone that's got should on it, and it died in my world a long time ago. The other issue is that it's important for us all to really begin to detach from the drama. It's sucking us in, and this is really critical for us to consciously begin to say, where are we going to invest our emotional bandwidth? And this is a battle that's happening, an awakening that's happening all over the world. I mean, we're watching things happen all over the world. But the message of hope that I want to have for your listeners is that we're actually wired for these times. We are absolutely wired for these times. And so while some people are hearing about it with the emergence of the sacred feminine, others are hearing about it with just the emergence of women stepping more into leadership, please take a close look at some of the problems and issues that we're facing right now. And it is because, many of them, because we have not had a holistic view. We have not had a holistic view. And so as we wrap up here, I'm not able to show a video, but I do want to mention to you a link to a video because it's fantastic. I was inspired because I was actually having a chance to see what transformation looked like. The book was based on kind of 7 women that agreed to be kind of my base stories, but many women relate to these stories. So we're all a Nikki, we're all a Gabriella, we're all a Carrie. I realized, though, that I got to see before and after, and not everybody gets to see that. So I want to encourage your listeners to go take a look at this video. It's got Keala Settle, and it's actually the green light video from The Greatest Showman. And in that 1 4-minute video, you can see her go from having the smallness of a cat to the strength of a lion. And very, very, very powerful, powerful. And the important thing when you have, and I hope you can share that particular video, the important thing about that video is what you notice when you put this different lens on, because see, now I've got a beautiful lens. And when you look through these lenses, I give these out in my talks, you can see the whole world in rainbows. I mean, it's fantastic. I wish you could see it through my eyes, because we see the world differently. In that video, you see her going from very small and scared and behind the podium, and then she actually, through the video, this was real time. I mean, this wasn't like set up. This actually happened because she was overcoming her own inferior conversations internally. By the time she finished, she was rocking so much that everybody in the room was swept in with her. And that's what happens when a woman steps into her power. The feminine power is so incredibly magnetizing and inviting and healing that it sweeps in everyone else who is around us. And I get chills when I talk about this. That's what the world is clamoring for right now, is that all this time that we've spent on this smallness in our heads that were given to us, it's an illusion that was given to us that isn't real. All that time we invest there, we're not investing in actually healing the world. And if there has ever been a time, it's now. I think if each one of us could begin to walk in the room and say to ourselves, I am in the room to heal the room. And understanding that having done our personal work to become friends with these sisters, will the red zone still show up in our life? Sure. I mean, we're not perfect. But whereas a sister in the red zone used to take me months to process, if somebody kicked me, took the rug out from under me, now it might take me a day. Now it might take me an hour. You see the difference? So the sisters are there beckoning to us and calling to us this global sisterhood. I even have a book club that I've just started, Global Sisterhood Book Club, connecting women from all over the world because we're all facing this. And when I absolutely know without a shadow of a doubt, Gina, that hope for humanity is hidden in the hearts of women. And I think we are the only way that we're going to find our way to a new reality for us all.
It's a powerful tool, and I know we showed it really briefly, but I would love to read through the red zone just to have it, because it's the connection point for women to realize that's the voice coming out of my head, right? These are the things that we say to ourselves, and they might be the things we don't even realize we're saying to ourselves.
That's important to remember because it's really both sides. And what's so funny is when I tested this out with women, I have a group of women that won't remember which number sister it is or even what the phrase is, but they go, oh, Carrie's my girl. Carrie is my sister. And others won't even remember the name Carrie. They'll only remember the phrase. So it was built to be able to appeal to both kinds of women. So Carrie is the first sister, and that is the Carrie story is I expect perfection. And the logo is based on sacred geometry, and that is the sacred geometry of the heart. Renee is the next one. I have to meet all demands. And her sacred geometry logo is the diamond, because under pressure, beautiful things emerge. Gabriella is I need permission or approval. This actually, surprisingly, is my sister that she still dances with me today. I was raised in the southeast of the U.S., and this is a mindset that still tap dances in my subconscious. Her sacred geometry logo is a fern, and that has to do with the fact that there's divine order in all things and finding the beauty in that. I actually, in the book, describe, I was actually divinely guided to what was the meaning of each logo. Darsha is the next sister. I should accept what is said or done. And her sacred geometry logo is the eye. That eyes are the beauty of the soul. Aveline is the next one. I'm not qualified enough. And her sacred geometry logo is a butterfly. And what was really funny about the butterfly was the message I received about why walk on so many legs like a caterpillar when we have the ability to transform and soar like a butterfly. But quite fascinating. Jalila is the next one. If I work hard enough, I'll be rewarded. And that her sacred geometry logo is a snowflake, because we can see the world two ways. And with a snowflake, we can see the world as if it is a winter wonderland of joy, or it can bury us and be like an avalanche. And Nikki is I'm okay in the background. This was the hardest one to discover of all. This one was really, really deep. And her sacred geometry logo is the feather. And there's a lot of Native American wisdom that actually goes in that. And in the book, I actually go into the lessons. And the logos are actually meant to be healing. What's interesting, Gina, is that the entire book, I didn't know this when I started this process, but it's infused with energy. What we don't realize is that the energetic vibration and imprint of each individual is actually part of the book when we read it. And it's not something that's tangible. The science is coming. I know that for a fact. But this book is infused with enormous amount of healing, of love, and of light, because I knew that what was not said in the book was just as important as what was said.
Mm. It's interesting. The thing that's been rolling around in my mind for a while before you and I met, Kim, is that need for permission and approval, that way that we hold back. Like, I don't know whose permission and approval we're waiting
Yes.
for,
Mhm.
but just it's like we're in a waiting room all of our lives.
Yes, you're exactly right. And so many women, that's part of what drives us to keep going after those degrees and those certifications. And that's when I've told some of these women that have all this, do you understand there are not enough degrees? It was so staggering to me, because I would meet, a group of women that were managers, and they would say, oh, well, I just need a little more experience. Then I would be in a room with international economists with degrees from some of the most advanced universities in the world, and they would say, oh, well, I just need a little bit more experience. And then I would be in a room with doctors and physicians from some of the biggest medical universities in the world, and those women would be saying, well, I'll wait till it's my turn. And all of a sudden I was like, we're collectively doing this. There's never going to be enough validation until we start claiming that. And that's where not only did it wake up for me, I don't wait for permission as much anymore, but certainly not with my personal professional passion here. But you're right, we're in the proverbial waiting room. The proverbial waiting room, or we're suffering from what I call the flight attendant syndrome, trying to go around making everybody feel all good and hospitable. And the time is that we can be kind. I believe we can be loving, but it's no longer our job to make everybody feel great. There are problems in the world, and I believe it's up to us, that we have the ability to be able to fix those and create a new reality for ourselves and our future generations.
There's a lot of identity wrapped up in that, especially the one that you just mentioned about making everything okay and making everyone comfortable. It's like our identity is so deeply rooted in how we make other people feel, or how the world around us is, how much of it we control. I'm not really sure what it is, but it's like we will put ourselves off for our family, for our, our jobs, for whatever. That's the I'm okay in the background, right? That's Nikki bubbling up.
Hands down. In fact, it's really funny that you bring up Nikki, because she was part of the story. It shows up even in the way we write a recommendation on LinkedIn. So when I was working with Nikki, very powerful story, because all of these things, these had real results. I mean, I was watching women when they shifted, they had a 33% increase in salary, 51%, 66%. So I started capturing that, because I was like, wait a minute, this isn't just a nice to do thing. This pay equity thing that we all bring up, we have a piece of it here. And so Nikki was one of the big fundamental stories that actually started me on this journey. But when I was working with her on her brand, she was writing a letter of recommendation for somebody. And I kid you not, in the first sentence, she talked about how this particular female leader, she always had a smile on her face, and it made everybody feel so good when they were on the team. And I looked at her and I said, why are you describing her like a flight attendant? Is she not a leader? And she went, oh my goodness, I didn't even realize, it's so subconscious. And so I've been extra mindful of that lately, because we're trained that way.
It's a bit insidious, because it's so much a part of who we are that the awareness piece. I know we didn't specifically mention that, but awareness is the very first and most important step.
That's why I even had the fishbowl analogy. Actually, all of these illustrations I had my artist do, because you're right, it's so deep. We were so much in the fishbowl that we couldn't see it. In fact, in the book, at the end of each of the sister chapters, I actually share the kind of language, and there was a reason why I did this. So I put down the phrases of when someone's living in the red zone with that sister, and I put down the phrases of when someone was living in the green zone with the sister, because we didn't even realize it. And that's when I was like, okay, I've got enough data now that I'm actually going to show you, if these phrases come out of your mouth, I promise you're dancing with a sister. So let me just give you an example. So with Carrie, so if you're dancing with Carrie in the red zone, if I expect perfection, here are some of the things that you might say. It'll just take a little extra time, really, I don't mind.
Mm.
I am just trying to make sure everyone is taken care of. I just can't help myself. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to do that. Or sure, I can do that. I mean, all of these, the underlying phrases, and there were a lot more, okay? All of them were language that you had to listen really, really closely to say, what? What's going on there? And whenever I became a mirror for these women to say, do you realize this is what you're saying? And they would go, no, are you kidding me? And sure enough, and so it's really quite amazing. And the more women that wake up, Gina, the world will change. And I want the world to be different 100 years from now. I don't want my granddaughter or great granddaughters to be looking back wondering why we didn't do the work. We've done the collective work. Now it's time to do the internal work, and then we're going to have like a braid, those two braided together as we go forward. I could talk all day. Forgive me.
No, this is such an impactful conversation. And I know in the book, after you explain in detail each one of the sisters, you talk about how they come to life and, when we're tempted to give in. And I think that's the dance you're talking about, because we have the way we've been conditioned, the agreements that we have made, because there is a personal responsibility in this to some degree, right? When we become aware, and then it's the choice of how much agreement do I bring to the table? How much of this am I willing to continue to
Yes.
yield to, or am I going to make a different choice? And that's where the yellow zone is. Okay, that's the first step toward, okay, I'm not going to make this red zone agreement anymore, right? It's the
Right.
step toward the healthier version of ourselves.
Because women, I found some women that as soon as they are aware of it, some women are changed like a light switch. I mean, they go from the red zone to the green zone and they don't even need the yellow zone. Other women, however, are really hard, and it's like stepping their toe out so they can slowly step into that. And that was really important. So let me give you an example of how this comes full circle, because I actually have a section with each sister called Looking Further Down the Road. That when we're dancing with the sister in the red zone, here are the unintended consequences that happen. That domino illustration. So how many women have we ever heard say something about the men in the workplace about, why do they always expect me to do everything? Why aren't they, taking their part? All right, so I hear this. Why is it always the women who are having to step up? Well, when you go full circle, the red zone of Renee, I have to meet all demands, is a woman who does everything for everybody at home. Everything. Is it possible that us doing everything for everybody, not only our spouses and everything, but also our children, that we're actually training the boys to expect women to do everything? And then they go to college, and then I've heard many a story from my daughter was like, why do they always wait for me to be the one to write the notes? Then they end up, okay, into the workplace, and then they're the ones. And so, true story, I was working with a woman who was an HR director, and she was the only woman on this team. And she goes, she wasn't, she had two other women. She said, this group is just so hard. They always want me to do everything for them. And I brought up this circle with her, and she went, my daughter just said to me the other day, Mom, why do you do everything for John, my brother? Why do you do everything for him? You don't do it all for me. Why are there different rules? And she went, I said, we each are perpetuating the very thing that we say that we want to change. And so here's the aha moment, though, Gina, is that when we keep doing stuff for everybody else, we're literally robbing them of the potential, of the opportunity for them to fulfill their full potential. We've had a hand in creating the dependence that we have in this world, and there are loving ways for us to be able to redraw those boundaries.
Mm. And that is the powerful point, that we are not beholden to this forever.
No, we can lovingly do it. And that's part of my work, and why I'm talking so much about some of these things, is the fact that we can lovingly do this. We don't have to hit the previous system with a sledgehammer so it shatters. So that whole thought, that is the glass ceiling a mirror, is saying, let's look in the mirror. Let's have an honest conversation. What part is ours? Let me do the work and get stronger each day. And when we do that and we step into that fullness, we end up having such a love for ourselves that it radiates from the inside out. And that gives us the love and the bravery and the courage to be able to love others as we draw boundaries and we assist them to be able to also reach their full potential. It's really quite profound.
It's very hopeful. We are not locked into the system. We actually can be a catalyst for change.
I call it rewrite the narrative, and that's what we're all about. Catalyst for change, rewrite the narrative. Narrative with a capital N. That's what we're each right now being asked to do.
Mm, that
And
is
and
so.
and with all we've lived through in 2020, let's do it faster, sooner rather than
We need
later.
bigger pens.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Kim, I want to thank you so much for bringing this to the table today. It was really important for me as a woman when I met you, and how well we connected and how much I understood what you were saying and what you're writing in your book and in this inspiration guide. Like that alone is helpful. That's
Yeah.
like an awareness piece, right? It's a reminder piece.
Well, and I wanted women, even if they couldn't afford the book, to be able to download this and still make a change in their life. That was very important to me as I work with women all over the world. And the book has won now 6 awards, 2 as winners of the self-help category, which is a testament to my team, because I have an international team that assisted me in pulling together the book. So I am simply a vehicle for the message. It isn't solely mine. This is a project that's much bigger, and more important than just any one individual.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, friends, this message is world changing. It's not just life changing, it's world changing. This is something that we as a sisterhood, we're looking for that thing, right? We're looking for that change. We're looking for that impact that we want to have. And here is a resource that can educate us, help us to articulate our own challenges, right? That's the challenge too, is to know how to even articulate something we have been saying. It sounds like it's an oxymoron, but we're saying things, but we don't know how to articulate why we say those things.
Right. Right. I actually, because I've had such a response, I just launched, it's called globalsisterhoodbookclub.com, but someone can actually join up and be part of our membership site where you can bring in 2 friends. So it's not just you bring in 2 friends. And I hope someday to have the world's largest book club, Gina. That's my goal.
That would be amazing. And you know what? There's nothing that we can't do together. Really, there is nothing that we can't do together. So this is your opportunity, if you're watching this video, to share this video. Down below, please subscribe to this channel. Please follow the links that are in the show note descriptions to get to Kim's book, the book club, the resource. Open up a little bit and find out what it is that you're doing and saying that could hold you back.
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to watching us all tap into that lion inside. It's waiting.
The power, it's all there. We just need to learn to harness it and unleash it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Take care.